Good to see everyone here today. My name is Dr. Josh Sipper. I'm here at the ERA conference with some of my colleagues today, and we just wanted to record this talk. This one is about cyber and emergent technologies. It is the first of two papers that I intend to present, and I will go through the talk, and then we will have a little discussion as well to share with you, the audience. So thank you so much for being here with us today, and thank you to Dr. Demi and Dr. Chan who helped to organize all of this and to bring us all together. We're grateful for you helping us through this process in the midst of these difficult and unsure times. So, and thank you so much to my colleagues who joined me here in Nice on the beautiful French Riviera. And I'll go ahead and share my screen so we can look at the slides together as we go through. Let's see if I can include computer sound. And here we go. All right. So as I said before, my name is Josh Sipper. Um, I'm a professor of cyber warfare studies at the Air Force Cyber College at Maxwell Air Force Base in Montgomery, Alabama. And as we go through and look at cyber and emergent technologies today, the conceptual basis this is under, I went and reviewed quite a lot of literature, and based off of some of my prior experience with some of these technologies as well. If you want a hypothesis, the hypothesis basically is that there's a confluence of many technologies all at once that's occurring right now, with artificial intelligence and machine learning, deep learning, autonomous agents that's been undergirded by other technologies, and in order to go to the next phase of where we need to be technologically, all of these different technologies must come together and support one another. So there's not one technology that's going to take us there. There's not one technology that's going to get us to the next phase of where we need to be technologically, but many different things are coming together and starting to coalesce. So just a couple of things about me. I won't read this whole thing to you. You can read it if you like, but basically right now I'm a professor at the Air Force Cyber College. Been there for about a year and a half now. Before that, I was at the LeMay Center, which is also of Air University, and it's the Doctrine Center for the Air Force. So all of the warfighting doctrine is written there, including the cyber doctrine, which I was able to play a part in to some extent. Mostly while I was there, I did some application development and faculty development to help the faculty understand cyber and where it could be placed in studies with doctrine, Air Force doctrine, and warfighting doctrine as a new battle space, as we put it. Before that, I was at the 26th Network Operations Squadron, where I did a lot of different things. I wrote all of the training program there, as well as did all of the evaluation. So I was standardization evaluation, and wrote a lot of policy and did a lot of the documentation, cyber documentation for that particular place. And I was there for around 7 years. Before that, I was with Lockheed Martin, worked as an intelligence analyst on the U2 program. And then before that, I was in the Air Force working on the U2 program as an intelligence analyst. So my journey from about 1998 as an intelligence analyst, working on very technical detail, mostly with radar systems and all the parametrics and data that go along with that, the physics, the waveforms, has led me from there into cyber, and that's where I am today. So happy to be here with all of you and appreciate your time. So just in the midst of this, what I'd like to do is just take you through several different aspects of what we're seeing now in several fields of technology, and also look toward the future of these amazing technologies and what it will take to make them come together to produce the amazing advances that are being predicted by many scientists working in the fields of cybersecurity, physics, mathematics, and engineering. And I do want to say that, when I presented this, actually presented the same talk about a week ago to several of the um, professors at the Air War College at Air University. And I had to tell them, because they're not from a cyber background, I said, you have to understand what I'm talking to you about is not science fiction. These are real things. Quantum computing is something that is really happening right now. Artificial intelligence and machine learning, emergence, all the emergent security, nanotechnology, all these things are real, and some of them are actually in practice. Many of them have been proven through laboratory experiments. So I want to make it very clear that these are real becoming more practical as we go along technologically, and emerging in the field, and they're coalescing in many ways as well, coming together to form new types of technologies and capabilities that we haven't seen before. So just as by way of introduction, we're beginning to see across many scientific disciplines, this all these technologies beginning to come together to have a sort of confluence, to coalesce, and bringing together a lot of the necessary ingredients to make each other possible. So it's not just one type of technology that we'll be looking at. We'll be looking at how these different technologies support each other, and how they're coming together to be able to hopefully produce some of the effects and some of the capabilities that we would like to see as we move forward with the individual and combined technologies. And several technologies on the verge of becoming something more. For example, advances in nanomaterials and nanotechnology are leading to engineered materials necessary to make quantum computing a reality capable of practical applications above and beyond their current very specialized processes. And these technologies aren't merely developing in a vacuum either, they're feeding off one another and developing alongside each other, leading to collaboration that will solve problems and lead to the synergy necessary to make them work seamlessly. However, there are many interdependencies within these enormously complex technologies. If graphene lattices are not developed, then nonlinear waveguides are not possible for quantum computing. And if quantum computing cannot get off the ground, AI and ML advances probably cannot meet their fullest potential. This also means that the processing and bandwidth necessary for 5G and future wireless technologies and networks might flag as well. So these technologies are truly necessary for the continued advancement of each other, not to mention their security, widely believed to be the ultimately dependent on the advances in quantum encryption. With each of these new technologies comes new and paradigm shifting capabilities that could allow humans to more deeply and fully interface with the multiverse of cyber. And I mention this because my next paper is a meta theoretical concept of the cyber meta reality. And this cyber meta reality is a running theme throughout this paper as well, and it's the topic of that paper. But it's a reality about realities that exist in the realm of cyber, similar to the multiverse concept. Through these technological advances, we're beginning to see new kinds of creations and realities within the cyber meta reality that will allow us to potentially model the multiverse, observe its characteristics, and mathematically, probabilistically confirm its existence. So this talk and the other talk that I and the other paper that I will present today is not just reaching into the technology, but the nature of reality and the meta theory behind the nature of reality and this new reality that we're experiencing in what I call the cyber meta reality, which is all of these different realities happening all at once, almost like the multiverse concept that you see in physics. And I think that it can have great application for modeling that as well, since it's something that's currently non-provable, it's probabilistic, but if we can look at it in the same way and do the modeling within this framework, it's possible. But I won't go too much into detail right now because I have a lot more about that in the other paper. But first, I would like to look at some of the pieces of AI and ML. And Helmut and I had some conversation about AI last night. He has done quite a bit of research into artificial intelligence, so I look forward to his comments and some discussion with him, especially today. But as it's currently understood by most people in a broad sense, Um, if we look at the different sort of disciplines with artificial intelligence included, artificial in its purest form is a lot about decision making, about computers, programs being able to sort of make decisions to filter data to help bring things down to a level where we can make decisions as humans based off of that information as well. Machine learning is a type of AI that learns, that actually uses algorithms to build newer processes and understanding them. And then deep learning, and we'll talk a little bit about that later with some of the things that Google's doing, et cetera, is basically machine learning with large data sets, big data. You hear a lot of big data. While both of these technologies, or all of these technologies, are still growing, they're also being used in many practical applications such as cybersecurity, intelligence gathering, and algorithm mutations. But they're finding their greatest use right now in the cyborg arena as they team with human intelligence to make decisions and even write code that can be used for numerous applications. It is in human machine teaming that the combined symbiotic nature of AI and ML really pay off. However, there are now independent applications of AI and ML in the production and guidance of autonomous agents. Self driving cars, military drone technology, and space vehicle guidance technologies are only a few of the newest and growing types of AA that have been made possible through advances in AI and ML. While these technologies are amazing and may well foretell great things to come, there's always a darker side to them. Self driving cars have been responsible for deaths already, and other AA may very well make terrible decisions that lead to loss of human life. European Parliament, as you may well know, has even gone so far as to publish a report with recommendations to the Commission on Civil Law Rules on Robotics, which deals with how to prosecute synthetic intelligence in the case of future capability in the deaths of people. So even laws and policy must be considered among these fantastic technological advances. And this leads us into emergent security. So some of the pieces that we're seeing along the lines, and I know that some of you have heard of and probably are familiar with quantum encryption, quantum key distribution, and those pieces, and also multi-factor authentication. So we'll talk a little bit in detail about those. But first off, quantum key distribution is based around the concept of quantum observation, in which merely observing a quantum system actually causes it to change. And we'll talk a bit more in detail about that later in reference to Schrodinger's cat and that concept of quantum observance, et cetera. But through measuring these changes, it can be determined who and what had an effect on the quantum system. In quantum key distribution, the disturbance of the system occurs as a result of a relationship called quantum entanglement. Quantum computers implement superposition states and quantum entanglements to perform simultaneous calculations and produce consequential calculated results. The highly efficient character of quantum entanglement and superposition are the characteristics that enable quantum computers to be exponentially faster, consistently outperforming classical computers in several areas. Of course, again, these areas are very minute, they're very focused, and some of the talk today will deal with potentially using quantum computing to do more practical computing applications, and we'll get into some of that later. Multi-factor authentication is another area that most people are a little more familiar with, because a lot of us already are using two-factor authentication in many cases. You're probably more familiar with this than the concept of multi-factor authentication, but it basically allows authentication through three variables: something you have, something you know, and something you are. But it is in the something you are part that we're seeing the most marked technological advances that necessitate other supporting advances like AI, ML, and quantum. These parameters deal with anything from fingerprints to retinal patterns to DNA sensing through vent capture, so breathing into a vent to let it capture DNA. But all of them require the ability to process mountains of data rapidly in order to work. So both quantum encryption and multi-factor authentication are very strong, but with these advances, we must recognize the inverse capabilities as well of being able to use these technologies to attack encryption and find ways around authentication. But ultimately, these technologies will offer us the ability to do things in the cyber meta reality that we never dreamed. And now on to quantum computing. And I'm going to talk about 5 concepts of quantum computing. Um, it's something to keep in mind as we go through this. And I don't know how much of the audience has dealt much uh, with quantum physics and subatomic particles or even atoms themselves, but something that I tried to help the students that I've lectured on this before understand is that even now, no one has ever really seen directly observed an atom or a subatomic particle. They're too small, they're too fast. What we can do is observe their effects on the environment around them. And so, whenever, like for instance, at the CERN, the Large Hadron Collider, whenever they accelerate these particles and blow them apart, they're not able to actually see them. They can sense them by seeing what they do to the environment around them. So that's just something to keep in mind as we go through, because I don't want to give the wrong idea that we're actually, you know, observing anything directly. It's all about looking at the effects that it has around them and being able to see the nature of those particles based off of those kinds of observances. In any case, on with the 5 concepts. But first, I want to talk about the quantum system. We'll talk about the quantum system, superposition quantum states, quantum circuitry, quantum entanglement, and quantum teleportation, and then follow up with quantum speedup and a little bit of the current quantum research as well. But first, the quantum system. Quantum mechanics depicts phenomena at a microscopic, I'd say ultra microscopic level, such as position and momentum of an individual particle like an atom or electron, spin of an electron, detection of light photons, and the emission and absorption of light by atoms. These characteristics and the ability to manipulate the states of subatomic particles by molding these characteristics is what makes quantum computing possible. This leads to the second component of quantum computing, superposition quantum states. The primary characteristic of superposition is in the computer's ability to process information. In classical computing, the computer must handle ones and zeros separately and sequentially. However, in quantum computing, the processor handles ones and zeros at the same time, handling matter in a state that sees it as a 1 and 0 simultaneously. This interlacing of states between subatomic particles is what forms quantum entanglement mentioned in the previous section. This ability to relate two particles together and make changes at a distance lead to the third area of quantum computing concepts, quantum circuitry. A quantum computer can be created from a quantum circuit with quantum gates to perform quantum computation and manipulate quantum information. This capability can only be accomplished through the relationships formed between the particles in order to make necessary changes and distribute those changes throughout the quantum system. And you can see the quantum model at the to the right, and see kind of how some of those pieces come together. But this leads to the central and fourth concept of quantum entanglement. When two particles are entangled, they actually take on each other's properties and behaviors, allowing them to not only change in close proximity, but at a distance by way of an invisible wave function that connects them. This invisible interlinkage is what makes the changes in states over distances possible. This is a very sophisticated and difficult concept to grasp, only further complicated by the fifth and final concept of quantum teleportation. Quantum teleportation is a process by which we can transfer the state of a qubit, the quantum bit, from one location to another without transmitting it through the intervening space. And that's a very important piece of this, to be able to transmit state data without actually doing it through intervening space by the invisible wave function. It's very efficient, very low power, and instantaneous. Being able to transport that state data. It's important to understand that although information concerning the change of the state of one particle to another only transfers the change in state and not the particle itself, resulting in a pure information transfer without actually expending the energy and time it would take to transfer the particle, as is currently performed in traditional electron transfer computing. One of the most valuable capabilities available through the use of quantum computing is termed quantum speedup. Quantum speed up is simply the phenomenon that is characteristic of quantum computing speeds that allow them to perform certain calculations much faster than traditional computers. This concept evolves from the fact that operations can be accomplished through the use of instantaneous and efficient data state transfer, making the speed potential of quantum computing virtually incalculable. And there's a potential for being able to provide to uh, to apply this same conceptual data state transfer to communications like 5G and potentially 6G quantum communication in the future, as some have been experimenting with in lab experiments as well. And just to cover a few of the current quantum research applications. Google, of course, has the 53 qubit quantum computer named Sycamore. And it was reportedly able to solve a calculation proving the randomness of numbers produced by a random number generator in 3 minutes and 20 seconds that would take the world's fastest traditional supercomputer, the Summit, around 10,000 years to do. So again, very niche capabilities, but amazing at the same time. So, not very practical at the moment. Is there potential for actually making them practical in the future? I believe there is, but it's going to take a lot of building with other technologies in order to make that happen, and a lot more parallel potentials that go along with it as well to make it practical. Add to these advances the impending wave of 5G technologies and the wireless and electromagnetic spectrum concerns attached to this ethereal superstructure. Quantum computing offers options for quickly transmitting data at a distance that very well may lead to quantum 6G capability that far outstrips or possibly supports the 5G instantiation. Quantum properties can likewise support bandwidth traversal between satellites to broaden global data transmission, such that hard solutions like undersea cables and hardwired national communication infrastructures could become redundant if not obsolete. Suffice it to say, quantum computing is an area of deep and broad interest in basically every area of life, especially for those of us in the cyber community. And this leads us to nanotechnology. And again, all of these different pieces that I'm talking about, they complement one another. Nanotechnology, quantum computing, and the advancements in quantum computing to be able to potentially make them practical in the future is very dependent upon nanotechnology and the materials, nanomaterials that go along with that. So through the discovery and manipulation of such products as graphene and metal organic framework materials, capable of making the leap downward in size to a level capable of accommodating the attributes necessary for nonlinear waveform manipulation, microscopic circuitry, and subatomic particle transmissions necessary for quantum computing are not only possible but available for experimentation and eventual use. These advances also have direct applicability to advances in AI and ML as the processing bandwidth and other system requirements necessary to allow for rapid acquisition, sorting, filtering, and decision-making processes to continue AI and ML potentialities are vital to progression. Similarly, as quantum computing and AI ML continue to grow, so too will quantum encryption capabilities. A great deal of workability is wrapped up in the graphene honeycomb structure, as you see it represented in the top right hand portion of the screen, capable of providing waveform packet containment and direction for subatomic particle manipulation that makes quantum computing viable. Subatomic direction has a great deal to do with making quantum computing able to perform practical functions, being able to direct those particles, being able to direct, I should say, not the particles, but the waveforms that carry the information and make the pure information transfer. So these honeycomb lattices are very, very important for that advancement. To further explain this concept, one must grasp a sometimes comical anecdotal example based on the nonlinear Schrödinger NLS equation. The story goes that Austrian physicists Erwin Schrödinger's concept of superposition, matter occupying two states simultaneously, can be described through the example of a cat in an enclosure such as a box, and with it a device that has a 50% chance of killing the cat. The idea is that until we open the box, we can't state with any degree of certainty whether the cat is alive or dead. So the cat basically occupies two states, alive and dead, simultaneously. This is a very elementary description of the concept, but it serves as a basic principle of the same issue attached to the ability of a subatomic particle to occupy two states simultaneously, which makes quantum entanglement, quantum states, and the rest of the quantum science possible. Pfefferman and Weinstein, Ablowitz and Zhu, and Hirakawa and Kosaka have been able to demonstrate this phenomenon in lab experiments. The outcome was a graphene waveform packet conductor capable of transmitting state data between two subatomic particles whose states have become entangled, thus allowing them to share state data at a distance within a system. This capability is a fundamental part of what creates the conditions necessary for quantum computing. A separate technology also useful for data transmission is metal organic frameworks. Thin films of inorganic porous crystals, zeolites, and MOFs have been developed for use as sensors, electronic materials, microreactors, and separation membranes. In particular, zeolite membranes have been attracting intense research interest as separation materials in the past decades. The ability to use these types of materials as sensors, reactors, and other electronic materials highlights the potential in systems architecture, especially in the area of power transfer, have wide applicability in the field of computing. While this technology has been used for decades in other areas, new applications for energy storage, such as batteries and high volume capacitors, shows promise in the areas of cyber-enabled electronic drones as well as micro-drone clusters, not to mention portable computing devices. Nanotechnology is expected to be a key enabling technology to sustain the development of future smart sensing systems and/or cyber-physical systems that will jointly integrate sensing, computation, communication, and energy management functions. So just by way of conclusion, all these capabilities, as I have seen them and as we are seeing them in the research that exists right now, are coming together. They're coalescing. They're forming a confluence of technological capabilities that will make the future of each possible to each. And that makes them very interdependent. They all tie together, and they have to tie together, and there has to be the communication across the boundaries, scientific boundaries, to make these happen. And there's been a great deal of interconnection between nanotechnologists and quantum computational experts, trying to bring these technologies together to make more practical applications by using them together. But we'll need people who know how to use these to the greatest effect in the future. And of course, there will be more problems introduced as a result of these capabilities as well. You think of not just the complexity, but also the fact that some of them can be used for nefarious purposes in the future. So those are things to take into account. But the world we encounter every day has an undercurrent of possibilities. There are new discoveries just below the skin of our reality and moving through and across what we can see as the cyber meta reality. With the rise of this cyber world of interconnections and technological upheaval, new capabilities are beginning to shape and expand the horizons of cyber and humans alike. AI and ML are reaching into areas and affecting systems in amazing and sometimes concerning ways. Quantum computing brings with it new capabilities, including quantum encryption, enormous storage, unparalleled processing speeds, and seemingly infinite bandwidth. Nanotechnology and nanomaterials are critical enablers of all of these systems, providing the physical constructs to make them possible and practicable. Finally, with the almost organic but silicon-based cyber meta reality comes the emergence of a cyber microbiome, which I will talk about in the other paper. A symbiotic construct yet unmapped that may lead to further understandings of the cyber meta reality as well as our own physical reality. So that concludes my presentation, and I will remove an earphone so that I can hear any questions or comments that you may have. I did want to mention that during my presentation, uh, I went out to my Air War College colleagues. I went outside of the paper a little bit to talk about DNA computing and the Internet of Things as well, because they also have uh, a great potential to affect these other technologies in the future. And there's recent research this year about DNA computing and how it's being used with graphene lattices and quantum computing to do some amazing things right now, to be able to store data and retrieve it far more quickly than DNA computing was able to do so in the past. So I thought that was a really interesting revelation as well. But I won't get into it today because it's kind of outside the scope of the paper. But I just wanted to kind of mention that as well, since it was very recent research. Uh, Great. Well, thank you so much. And please, if any, thank you. Thank you. No, so any discussion or comments or questions? I know I was really fast and it was uh, sure. Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Yeah. It's so do you see these technologies having more application for forensics, for cyber forensics? Right. Right. I see. I see. Right. Yeah. That's interesting. So it just David, yeah, David was just making a comment about using uh, to be able to do practical applications of the very microscopic types of things within the physical side of forensics, but also in the cyber side of forensics in the future, and being able to use some of those techniques and technologies. So that's really interesting. It's fascinating. Right. Yes. Right. Yes, and that exactly right. The to be able to transmit state data between two particles simultaneously, immediately, without anything traversing the intervening space, information traversing the intervening space. You can imagine the possibilities with that. And I've thought about things like, okay, well, we're trying to get to further out into the solar system to Mars eventually. Could communications be done through quantum computing, through quantum teleportation, through quantum entanglement? Uh, I don't know the answer to that, but it seems to me if there's the ability to, if we have the technology, the nanotechnology that will stabilize the particles such that they maintain their entanglement at a great distance, then that capability would work. Now, I will say that there's already been research in China where they have entangled two subatomic particles. They were leptons, and then they had one in a lab on Earth in China, and they sent the other one up into space onto a satellite, and they changed the state data for the one on Earth, and they observed the exact state data change on the satellite in orbit around the Earth. So can be done. It seems to me, with further research into the future, perhaps by the time we're ready to go to Mars, that type of communication through quantum state transfer may be possible, and that could be a game changer. Because right now, in order to transmit information uh, into space, we use subspace transfer, which is long wavelengths. It takes a long time to get there and a long time to get back. It can take days or weeks uh, to get to Mars and back. If you looked at the rover and the way all that works. But if we could have instantaneous state transfer data between here and Mars, based off of quantum entanglement and that state transfer, wow. I mean, the communications capabilities for using rovers in the first place, and then also for just communicating between people and communicating between spacecraft and all of those things, that could be a huge game changer. But so much of that is dependent on us being able to come up with the undergirding physical technologies like nanotech, et cetera, to be able to accomplish it. But
you said that quantum computing can accelerate the transfer of messages. I'm not expert in this field. I don't know much about it. Are there possibilities think that you can transfer objects like beaming with quantum computing?
That's a good question. That's a really, actually, I don't know. I don't know. It was Tim was asking about being able to actually transfer material, using quantum state transfer. I don't I don't know I don't think that is in the physics. I think that state transfer, so information transfer, is all that's in the physics as we currently understand it. Whether or not that could be a potential, possibility in the future, I can't really tell you. It seems to me that with physical transfer, you're talking about a lot of energy, lots and lots and lots of energy, which has its own issues with thermodynamics. The laws of thermodynamics. So that puts some limitations, I think, on the quantum capability, because the quantum state data transfer is either low or no energy type transfer, which is why it has so much potential for everything we talked about today. But when you get into things like transferring actual matter and energy, then you're talking about physical laws that are so much more dependent on those properties. So I don't know, but that's a really interesting thought, though. I love it. I love the thought. So great. All right. Well, anything, Helmut? Mm-hmm. Right. Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm.
optimization, other things they might do. So it's a bit of a trial and error.
Right.
So you do many things in parallel, and a few probably will survive. If many of those die or never finish, you don't care. But you take those who deliver a result.
Mm-hmm.
And if they do that by the nature of the task, should be reliable. So this was one idea. I suppose in this case, it's somehow reversed. It's the process is uniform, but it's inherently unreliable.
Yes.
So what I could imagine is you start, if this is physically possible, start the same process multiple times. You measure the result if you can, and if, let's say, the majority is yes or no, then this wins.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully we are successful most of the time. Not sure how safe this really is, because even a 99% success, well, it's nice.
Mm-hmm.
But for practical purposes, when you need a lot of sub-processes of this kind, it's by far not enough.
Right. And Helmut was, if you couldn't hear him through my mic, I'm just telling the audience, basically talking about the unreliable nature of quantum computing. It's probabilistic, is really what it operates on right now. And with that understanding, being able to do the applications, but being able to do things in parallel and, through experimentation, maybe being able to find some way to work it out. And I'm in complete agreement with that. It's just, the potential that it holds, and the research that's been ongoing with it by Google and other high tech firms these days has been, it's been really interesting to watch and fascinating to see what they're doing and what kind of applications they're trying to use them in. So who knows what the future holds, but yeah, the practicality and the probabilistic nature of it, it's one of those things where it's anybody's guess where it's going to go next. So we have to be realistic about it as well. But it's important for those who are in the field to recognize the communication between the different technological bases, foundations, is really, really important for being able to understand one another and be able to advance not just their own type of technology, but the others as well, especially between nanotech and quantum, for instance, because right now, as you have probably seen, the quantum computers that exist, they're huge. I mean, they would just about fill this whole room, right? It makes you think back to the 50s, the old room-sized computers, that kind of thing. Right, exactly. So, what would it take to get it down in size? And I think the nanotechnology is one piece of that, and also the metal organic frameworks and the ability to miniaturize reactors, miniaturize transistors and batteries and all the different things to be able to get you down in size to something that's useful in a practical application, say on a vehicle or an aircraft or a space vehicle or something like that. I don't know that you would necessarily be able to get it down to something handheld or not. That may not be in the cards ever, since you have to work with qubits and at very, very cold temperatures, usually. But some of that can be controlled by the graphene lattices, making that requirement not so much a problem. But again, the technologies, there's so much of that moving and going right now that trying to keep up with it is nearly impossible. But very interesting. So.
Is it really true that you cannot break a quantum encryption, and why not?
As far as breaking quantum encryption is concerned, I think that it would be, if you could, you would have to use some sort of quantum computation to do it. but the problem is, again, in a quantum system, just by observing the quantum system, you make changes, and when those changes occur, then you've thrown everything out of balance. So I don't, from that standpoint, I don't know that you could, just from a state dependent type perspective. So I would say the answer to your question is yes. Just based off of my understanding now of the physics and the way that it actually works. Yeah, just based on the NLS equation and what we discussed earlier. So the nonlinear Schrodinger. So yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much. Appreciate it. And I have another paper coming here in just a minute. I'm gonna kill this slideshow, and thank you everyone for viewing today. And I hope you enjoy the ERI conference this year. I know it's a little different with COVID-19 going on, but we appreciate everyone being here with us today, and hope that you enjoy yourselves and enjoy viewing all of our papers that we'll be presenting this week here in Nice, as well as others distributed around the globe presenting their papers as well. So thank you so much, and hope you have a wonderful day.